Hello again. This is Dr. Bob Dennis and Dr. Stacey Ravid, my colleague. And today we are going to talk about
the A9. Hello, everyone. And we are discussing the A9 today. And I'm going to ask Dr. Dennis several questions about that. And I have a list right here. So the model A9 is a little bit smaller. It's almost the same size as the M1. And in the website, it says it's an experimental device that has been optimized for orthopedic injury, inflammation, and chronic pain. So one of the questions that I have is, how has it been optimized?
well, a couple of ways. It's about half the size of a pack of cards, actually, and it's only about 70 grams when you have a 72 grams, I think, when you put a 9-volt battery in it. It is a little larger and heavier than an M1 because it's, just because it's designed to run off a 9-volt battery instead of a camcorder battery. But how is it optimized? That's an excellent question, because a lot of people say, oh, this has been optimized for this or that.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, they use the word optimized, but people don't really know what that means. Technically, but people do know what optimized means sort of in a practical sense, like what's the best way to do something, or what's the optimal way to do something. And so it's been optimized for chronic pain, orthopedic injury, inflammation, several ways. It's been optimized scientifically by my doing experiments, series of experiments, to see quantitatively how well we could reduce inflammation as measured in a third-party independent laboratory. And I actually have independent laboratory test results. There's no way the data could be skewed. It's called a GLP, good laboratory practice. So I actually have very good, I think it's the only dose response data for PEMF probably anywhere, showing the effect of the dosage of the type of PEMF I was using and its effect on the reduction of inflammation as measured using a standard technique that's used by the pharma industry for characterizing and discovering non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. And this is a standard that's recognized by everyone, including the FDA, done to high levels of standard GLP by an independent laboratory. And I have that data, so I know what the sweet spot is very clearly. I also had data that I had done with Texas A&M Veterinary School and NASA, and it allowed me to really narrow that into a focus of what's most effective, especially for things related to orthopedic injury and pain and inflammation. So I have that data scientifically. I had really zeroed in on it, and I was able to remove 99.8% of the total energy that's emitted without reducing any of the biological benefit. So it's 1/50th, it's like, 1/500th of the total energy, but the same biological benefit. Because it's optimized for exactly the pulse shape. And then the pulse pattern, which everybody seems to be fixated on, that's the pulse shape, gives you about 80% of the biological effect. Pulse pattern, which is like how many pulses per second, that is only accounts for about 20%, but it's 20%. So I put out a bunch of different pulse patterns and I field tested them almost, 8 years ago. And actually starting about 10 years ago, for people with different kinds of pain and injury, and certain pulse patterns were a little bit better than others for orthopedic pain and swelling and literally like lesions and injuries. And so that's the pulse pattern. The pattern that came out better than the other ones is the Omni 8. It's only about 15% better than most of the other good patterns, but not for everybody. Other people have a little bit more benefit from other patterns. If you want a different pattern, you want to use a different device, right? Like the M1, so you can pick them. All the good patterns are on there, but the one that was a little bit better, the Omni 8 pattern, is the one that we put on the A9. But it's also optimized for simplicity. Put in a battery, put the coils on, you turn it on. That's all you got to do. You don't have to pick, a whole bunch of settings. So it's optimized for simplicity of use. Engineering wise, it's optimized for being mobile. You can strap it right into bandages or put it in your pocket. That's optimization. It's not the size of a refrigerator. It's not the size of luggage. It's optimized for being able to be used by a real person during a real day for real injuries, and also for pets and stuff. So that's how it's optimized. And that process took, 4 or 5 years.
Wow. Okay, great answer. And that really explained it. So speaking of coils, it says that there are special bedding coils.
Oh yeah.
What does that mean exactly?
That's our 2x2 array. It looks sort of like a 4-leaf clover. You know what I'm talking about, right? It's called the 2x2 coil array. And it's just a flat array that's about the size of your hand. And it slips right under the bedding of like cat or small dog, little beds you can get for them, like little wicker or little puffy sort of cushion beds, and they'll sleep towards the center and they're all nice and cozy. Right underneath that, you can put one of these arrays, and you don't have to strap it on, try strapping it onto a small animal. It just works. And at first the animals are like, they don't like the clicking so much. But then after a day or two, they're like, well, wait a second. I feel better after I've been on this for a while. So cats and dogs actually like to sleep on it, and it's just under their bedding. They don't feel it. They might hear a little clicking, but then their behavior changes. It reverts back to like a younger animal. Cats will sleep on cold surfaces. They'll jump higher. They'll do all the things that a young cat will do because they're not in as much discomfort anymore.
Okay. So here's a question I just thought of that people may ask. How thick can the bedding be that it'll still work if the coils are under and the pet is on top of the bedding?
Generally speaking, the thinner, the better.
Okay.
However, I've tested it with a bunch of different types of bedding. And, if it's thicker bedding, you can turn the intensity up, but animals don't really require that much intensity anyway. So yeah, if you were to buy like a typical piece of bedding, for like, that big around that a cat or a dog might sleep on, they crush it down to maybe a 1/2 inch or 3/4 when they're on it. And that seems to work perfectly well.
Okay. Okay, great. So, on the website about the A9, there is an important notice there, and I just want to point it out to people. It says 1 audio splitter. Do not use the audio splitter with the 2x2 array. So if you could just take a moment and explain that to people.
Well, it's sort of like putting a trailer on the back of a really small car, right? It's too much. It's just too much. If you need to pull a heavy load, then you need a large car or a truck. And those 2x2 arrays are kind of a heavy electrical load. And so if you use a splitter, then you're putting 2 of them on there, you're doubling the load. So a lot of people think, oh, I could take a skateboard, and as long as I put a big enough trailer hitch on it, I could tow anything. No, you can't. You need to size the vehicle to the load that you're pulling. And if you want to put a lot of coils on something, well, we have a product for that. It's a C5. Yes, it costs more, but it can handle the larger load. It's just like anything else that's real. Too much is too much, but the A9 is designed specifically for 1 set of coils. It works really well with that.
Okay, great. I went through the website this morning and was looking at some of the different devices, comparing them to the A9. One of the things that struck me is that the unit for the A9, just the unit itself, is $429. But if you get the complete kit, it's $529. I actually thought that was a great deal and started thinking about that in comparison to the M1. If somebody was going to decide whether to get an M1 or an A9, this was actually a question from an individual recently. And in terms of the price point and the value.
Actually, I think the best value we have is the A9. It was, it's actually like the 5th generation of the technology that I've built, but it works really well. And a lot of times it's what I use for myself, even though we have more advanced ones, more expensive ones that do a lot more things. But when I want something simple and it just works, it's sort of like, you've got a nice new Bentley in your garage, but next to it, you've got like a little like
Honda.
15-year-old Honda, right? And sometimes you just want to get in the thing, turn the key and have it run. You just want to go somewhere like to the store or something. And that's what the A9 is all about. It's no frills, right? There's not a lot of bells and whistles. It just simply works, and it's just rugged and it's simple. And there's a lot of people, especially like horse owners and construction workers. We get really positive feedback. Like one construction worker in one of our discussion groups somewhere, he was talking about how, yeah, I'm pouring concrete all day and moving bricks and stuff, and I drop this thing 10 times a day, and I ran over it with my truck last week, and hey, yeah, it looks like I'm beating it up. He said, but it just keeps working. Right. And
Yeah.
Sometimes we get them back and they look like somebody tried to go after them with a hammer, which is we don't encourage that. But the A9 is really simple. And because we've stabilized the design, we've got all the tooling made and everything, we can actually keep the price pretty low. And you'll notice that throughout this whole pandemic thing and everything, we never raised the prices.
Yeah.
It's become less expensive for us to manufacture them. And then that got eaten away by the fact that all the parts are more expensive now and everything's more expensive now. It kind of canceled itself out. So unlike everybody else, we're just not charging more. We're trying to keep the value at the same point.
Okay. The A9, does it just have that one protocol, or does it have
protocol? It's very simple. I don't like to program it to other things, because if people really want to experiment, they should have an M1. And that way, if they want to change the pattern, press a few buttons rather than sending me a device and asking me to take a half an hour out of my day to reprogram it for them to do something else that's not really meant to do. If you want to mess around with different patterns, something else works better for you, you want to do brain entrainment or something completely different, probably ought to be using an M1 or a C5. But if you just want a simple device, put in the battery, put it on you, turn it on. The A9 is really good for that. And it's so simple that I really discourage people from trying to make it more complicated, because it doesn't need to be.
Okay, I have several micro-pulses. I don't have the A9, but I'm gonna put it on my wish list. So this morning I went on and was looking at some of the PDFs on the Micro-Pulse website, and under each device there's a PDF, and if you open it up, there are a bunch of questions. These are fantastic source of information, and they answer a lot of questions. So I just wanted to point that out to people. And if you have any additional questions about the A9, if you open the PDF, they're probably listed there. I saw something this morning which caught my attention, which I want to bring up, and that is that the ICES-PEMF systems can be as little as 1/50th of the cost of comparable PEMF systems.
Yeah. Sure. In fact, when I started doing this whole PEMF thing commercially, a typical entry-level PEMF system was $40,000 to $50,000. And they were the size of luggage. A lot of them came from like Eastern Europe, and they were not really expensive. I saw the insides of them and I'm like, God, I could whip something like that up in my garage. A lot of them are built sort of like a Tesla coil. They use a spark gap, and inside it, you can hear it. There's a sparking, because that's the old fashioned way of making a pulse. That's like from before, transistors, from before, vacuum tubes. This is really old technology, like 120 years old. So when you see things like, oh, spark gap technology and all that stuff, it's not that it's new, it's that it's really old. And so, I was like, well, you could use modern semiconductors, transistors, microcontrollers, everything, to make this work much better. And so, that's what I did. That's what I did. I re-engineered the whole thing. And the other thing is, I don't spend any money on marketing. And I don't have a big markup. Like, a lot of this is kind of pyramid scheme stuff. Like, there's a bunch of slave labor in Romania making the original electronics. And then there's a level where they're packaging it, and there's a level where they're distributing it. And then at the very top is the person who owns the company. So every one of those slices, they like to make a couple $100 every time they sell something. So when you're buying one of these, multi-$1,000 systems on the internet. The actual PEMF system itself never costs more than maybe 5 or 10% of that.
Wow.
So what I did when PEMFs were like $40,000 to $50,000, because everybody thought they were magical, but they're not. So the engineering's pretty straightforward. So I just started telling the truth about it. I cut out all the middlemen, all the fluff and all the marketing and all the BS, and just started selling them at the price they should be sold.
Right. Right. Well, one last question then about the A9. Does it only run on battery, or can you also plug it in?
Well, we actually have a 9-volt adapter. It looks like a 9-volt battery with a wire on it and a 9-volt wall wart, and you can buy that too. The other thing is there are new batteries. Let me see if I can pull one out here. Yeah, here's one. There are new batteries that you can buy, and these have only been out for about 1.5 years now. It's a regular 9-volt. Let me see if you can see it, a 9-volt battery. But if you buy them, some of them will have this port on the bottom, and you can plug them in and power them. And I just did an experiment with Bill Pollock because he wants to be able to run one of these A9s continuously, like for 10 or 12 hours at full power. And so this 9-volt battery, you can actually plug it into its charger, and it'll just keep it charged even though you're drawing current. And it, if you get one with a port located in the correct position, like this one, it can slip. And this is the brand name here. This one, Beston. It'll slip right into Beston. Yeah, it's just on Amazon. They're really inexpensive now. They're made, you can just charge them up by USB. It's a mini USB. And this will fit into the A9 so that you can still put the charger in like that.
Okay.
It's just like plug it into a USB charger port, and it can run forever. And then even if you lose the power in your house, it'll still run for 3 or 4 hours on the battery.
Oh,
so
that's
a really good deal. And this is the type of battery that I've found. I've done lots of experiments with it. It works great. They don't recommend that you charge it while you're drawing power off of it, but the amount of power that you draw from one of our systems is only like 30 to 50 milliamps. So it's almost like the battery is not even being loaded. It's just, you wouldn't want to draw a lot of power off it while you're charging it, but it tested it extensively. It doesn't even get warm. It's just room temperature, and it just seems to run forever, even at full power. So yeah, that's an option. Or you can get a 9-volt adapter from us. We still make those. We're going to discontinue them probably, because you don't need them.
Okay. Well, I'm very intrigued by the A9. I have the C5, I have the M1, I have another one. But I really like the idea of the A9 as kind of the workhorse of the micropulses. And thank you so much for your time, Dr. Dennis. Appreciate it. And everyone take care, be well.
Thanks. Great talking to you, Dr. Ravid.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Take care.